Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you for stopping by. It's always appreciated. Let me start with some macro thoughts. Zainab Daham, who is in the UAE, tweeted emerging markets performance in 2016, latest consensus forecasts of world economics by Focus Economics. And you see actually Kenya is positioned to grow at 6% this year. And I was having a conversation with the Cabinet Secretary. There's been a lot of progress, particularly on the railway side, which is bumping up GDP growth, and that's why the construction number looks so strong there. But it looks considerably better than the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, where it's expected that it will average about 3.75%, and that might well be rebased lower, I think. Home thoughts go to T.S. Eliot today. Only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse. One of my favorites, but very, very powerful, and that's what poetry is, I suppose. It's power. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Political reflections. Javier Blas, North Korea says it has tested its first hydrogen bomb. The South Korean spy agency is saying it's an atomic bomb. Sang-won Yoon says North Korea, the hydrogen bomb test was an act of self-defense against threats like the US. I found this photograph of a hydrogen bomb explosion on Flickr. Al Jazeera tweeted after emergency meeting, South Korea says will take all possible measures in response. In 2010 I wrote a piece, Far away in distant lands lies the Hermit Kingdom. This land is ruled by the House of Kim and its capital is Pyongyang. They all have tiny little hands like the elves and the shoemaker. And I was referring to the family, the presidential family. If you ever look for a photograph, look at the size of their hands. And this country has nuclear weapons. And on its border with its neighbor, South Korea, sit 25,000 American soldiers. So very fragile situation, and I was just talking to the people around me and I was telling them it looks so dangerous, the world right now, anything could possibly happen. I did an interview on the BBC World Service where I was saying the rise of Africa's economies is now in peril, and this plays, thoughts were obviously about the Naira and about the Zambian Kwacha, about Dos Santos. Have a listen. And remember that 586 days ago I was in Maputo for a conference with the IMF, and it was called Africa Rising, and I took a photograph of the poster and I tweeted, Africa Rising but no longer, in the rising tide floats all boats way it was in 2012 and 2013. Obama's Middle East balancing act tilts towards Iran. This is Josh Rogin and Eli Lake in Bloomberg View. They tend to be quite well informed. Following the Saudi government's announcement Saturday that it had executed 47 prisoners, including a popular Shiite cleric, the US State Department did two things. First, it issued a statement expressing concern that Riyadh's actions were exacerbating sectarian tensions. Then Secretary of State John Kerry called Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, urging him to try to de-escalate the crisis. Spokesman for the White House and State Department on Monday insisted that the US was not taking a side and that Kerry was set to call Saudi Foreign Minister Adel El-Jubeir. That's interesting that he hadn't until then. But US and Arab diplomats tell us that America's Gulf allies who feel most threatened by Iran see things very differently. Aaron David Miller, former Middle East negotiator who was a vice president of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, said that the Obama administration sees the Iran deal as the one stabilizing factor in a region that is increasingly spinning out of control, and therefore giving the US-Iranian relationship top priority. The Iranians hold the Obama legacy in their hands, he said. We are constrained and we are acquiescing. And then saying, certainly that this is not the signal the Saudis are sending. At this point, the message couldn't be any clearer. If Obama won't punish Iran, then Saudi Arabia will. Go back to an article I wrote on the 28th of October 2013, Barack Obama and Hassan Rouhani. And I said the recent rapprochement between President Obama and Iran's Hassan Rouhani has certainly snapped a losing sequence in US-Iranian relations that goes all the way back to the Iranian Revolution in 1979, when Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. The Shah was the second and the last monarch of the House of Pahlavi, otherwise known as the Peacock Throne. Barack Hussein Obama and Hassan Rouhani share the same name as Prophet Muhammad's revered grandsons. I talked about how I was wandering around the Hirshhorn in Washington and I came across this from the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei, "What's in a name?" I love this quote. A name is the first and final marker of individual rights, one fixed part of the ever-changing human world. A name is the most basic characteristic of our human rights, no matter how poor or how rich. All living people have a name, and it is endowed with good wishes and the expected blessings of kindness and virtue. Hussein and Hassan are going to have to cut through a great deal of interference. We're seeing that again now. In this situation, there are powerful and vested interests fully invested in the status quo. If the Pax Americana in the Middle East were a three-legged stool, with the US the most important leg, then Israel and Saudi Arabia were the other two legs of that stool. Neither Riyadh nor Tel Aviv are aligned with President Obama's Iranian rapprochement, and Saudi Arabia in particular has become increasingly forthright and is even threatening its own pivot and away from the US. So I think that's what we're watching right now. Let me put up a photograph of Rouhani, President Rouhani. He was quick and alert enough to issue the apology ray the Saudi Arabian embassy. That was a clever move on his part. Holger, political stupidity can be measured. Saudi Arabia's 5-year default risk jumps as leaders have started worse clashes since 1980s. Put up a photograph of King Salman. From a Counterpunch article, Saudis were long ago telling the Americans to cut off the head of the serpent. Iran's head, needless to say. But they've obviously settled for the head of Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, at least for now. The Saudis have little to worry about from the UN or from the US or the EU or Dave until the revolution. And as Kapuscinski said, if the crowd disperses, goes home, does not reassemble, we say the revolution is over. US Special Forces, and in case we've forgotten this is Afghanistan, killed, helicopter shot down in Afghanistan apparently. That theatre seems to be heating up quite a lot of late. Holger again, China's terrible start to 2016 is Beijing fighting market fires, and he's put up a diagram of the various stock markets around the world. China remains very expensive. The Chinese yuan sank to a 5-year low as the PBOC surprises with a weaker fixing. There's an interesting interview with the chief economist of the IMF, again picking up on China being the biggest risk. China will remain high on the list, its economy is slowing as it transitions from investment and manufacturing to consumption and services, but the global spillovers from China's reduced rate of growth through its diminished imports and lower demand for commodities have been much larger than we would have anticipated. I like to think I anticipated that when I said that the commodities supercycle was dead in the water. Currency markets, let's move on. My goodness, 107.22 euro. It's been falling like a stone. Dollar index 99.50 plus. Japanese yen, that's been on a tear. The yen 118.53. Swissy 10082. The pound, 146.32. I'm bearish. The pound. The Aussie, my goodness, 0.7082. That's tumbled. It was above 0.73 at the end of the year. India rupee, 66.673. South Korean won, 1198.38. Rial above 40112. Sorry, with the South Korean won, they came and intervened. Otherwise, we would have been over 1200. Egyptian pound, 783.02. And the rand, last time I looked, 15.7575. Now, let me put up a 1-year chart of the dollar index. My target is 110. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 1-year chart of that. That's looking very poorly, but the key levels you've got to look out for are between 104.80 to about 105.75. That's where we bounced a number of times. Dollar yen, the yen has been soaring of late. Let me put up a 1-month chart, and that's really on risk aversion. It's the sort of safe haven. Dollar Canada, take a look at this. My target last year was 140. We're now at 140.78, which is an extraordinary move, and it's all on the back of the oil price. Commodity markets, gold last trading at 1083. I would have thought that given the geopolitical noise volume, we would be higher. And the fact that it's not higher, it's in a counterintuitive way a blessing. Sub-Saharan Africa, the president of Burundi's spokesman, a gentleman called Willy Nyamitwe, responding to a tweet from somebody else. It's extremely painful, but it's the truth. The Sindumuja are killing their own fellow in Burundi for political purpose, implicating, therefore implicating his adversaries, which is particularly cynical. I would have thought. Burundi civil war fears as president accused of campaign on murder. That obviously is his excuse. That is not the president. It's the adversaries killing themselves. South African all share down 2.16% year to date. Dollar rand 15.75. Last time I had a look, 20 is not impossible. Egyptian EGX 30 plus 0.22% year to date. IMF chief says not in Nigeria to negotiate loan, calls for a wider revenue base. The IMF, Christine Lagarde, said on Tuesday she was not in Nigeria to negotiate a loan and urged Africa's biggest economy to diversify its revenue to try and get out of an economic crisis fueled by the fall in oil prices, which is getting worse and not better. Lagarde was speaking at the presidential villa in Abuja moments after holding talks with President Buhari. She backed Buhari's fight, so does everybody, against corruption, terming it very important. But according to Bloomberg, she's talking about Nigeria needing flexibility in monetary policy. Clearly, the authorities should not deplete the reserves of the country simply because of the rules being exceedingly rigid. I'm not suggesting that rigidity be entirely removed, but some degree of flexibility will be helpful. My conclusions are that she's now providing cover for the Nigerian authorities to make that devaluation. I'll put up a photograph of her escorted by Nigeria's finance minister and the central bank governor. Exotics, who's and I saw this via a third party on email, are basically saying we interpret these comments as a sign that a devaluation of the Naira is now imminent. We expect the revised target for the exchange rate to be set in the range of 240 to 250. Nigerian all shares down 1.89% this year. Ghana Stock Exchange up 0.08%. Uganda's finance ministry has lowered its country's 2015-2016 economic growth forecast to 5% from the previous projection of 5.8%. Growth is expected to remain at 5% in fiscal year 2015-2016, constrained by higher commercial bank rates, which is a challenge we're facing here as well. French tycoon, listen to the story, Guy Wildenstein faces tax fraud charges linked to Kenya's Old Jogi Ranch resort. So I've never been, but I've had friends who've gone there, and I'll tell you an interesting story. It's a lavish holiday ranch located in Laikipia, which is beautiful. That's where we were at severally, Borana and at Sirikoi, heart of a multi-million euro tax evasion battle, whose hearing began on Monday in a Paris court. French authorities accuse owners of Old Yogi Ranch, the setting for award-winning film out of Africa, of hatching a tax fraud scheme that cost the European nation millions of euros in uncollected taxes. French prosecutors say the wealthy art-collecting Wildenstein family, which also owns the holiday ranch, has been running the fraudulent scheme for years and are seeking to recover millions of euros through the suit. Guy Wildenstein, who inherited his father's vast estate, close associate of Sarkozy, was on Monday arraigned on multiple charges of tax fraud and money laundering that carry a 10-year jail term if found guilty. French authorities are demanding 550 million euros in unpaid taxes from Mr. Wildenstein, who is accused of hiding the Old Yogi Ranch, rare art collections, prime properties, pedigree racehorses. Of course, one of his most famous was the Arc de Triomphe winner, Allez France, from the taxman, and laundering huge sums of cash. Also included a vast real estate portfolio with the jewel in the crown, a luxury Kenyan ranch. Wildenstein is a world-renowned art collector. Court documents filed in Paris say Guy had in 2012 declared the family's vast estate to be worth 40.9 million euros, but French authorities estimate the estate could be worth as much as 4 billion euros. That's the total estate, not just the Old Yogi Ranch. Let me put up a photograph of the Old Yogi Ranch, another photograph of the rockscape, because Laikipia is such an attractive, beautiful vista, and the veranda at the Old Yogi. And I'll also put up a photograph of Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Wildenstein. Now, I had a friend who was staying there, and he said he was amazed. I don't know how true this is. He said, he's an art collector himself. He said if you looked at the value of what was on the walls, it was in the billions. So this story just sounds very true. The US is ready to invest 2.4 billion Kenya shillings, that's $24 million, in Kenya's oil industry. Expressed interest in funding construction of an oil pipeline linking northern Kenya oil fields to Lamu, upping its stake in the Lapsset project. I had a lot of doubts about the Lapsset project because South Sudan was a player in that. They're getting about $0 per barrel that's extracted, given the price that we're at now. And if the Americans can pull this one out of the hat, that will be a big win, in my opinion. Let me put up a photograph of Robert Godek when he paid a courtesy call to Cabinet Secretary for Energy and Petroleum Charles Keter. A photograph of the setting sun in Lamu I took eons ago. I haven't been back for a while. Central Bank of Kenya injected 76 billion shillings to soften Imperial Bank closure impact. And this is one of the things that I admired about the central bank governor. I mean, he clearly came with a rules-based approach. He saw that Imperial Bank could create a concertina effect. He turned around from draining money. They were draining 28.3 billion. They had to turn around and pump in 76.6 billion. And I wrote about this in an article called The Teflon Shilling. And I was talking about why the shilling is so strong. And part of it is the lower oil price. But have a look at that. Kenya shilling, last time I looked, 102.31. Nairobi all share down 0.14%. NSE 20 down 1.64% year to date. Obviously, international markets have continued to exhibit sharpened volatility, with China moving to support its stock market. Chinese policymakers combating a rout that raised $590 billion of value, in the worst ever start to a year for the nation's equity market. Now, a couple of points. Captoria rallied 2.5% yesterday. It's up limit today. Business Daily reported that the Communications Authority has lost powers to independently monitor dominance and act against its abuse. And every time Safaricom share price would be running away to the upside, they'd come and jaw it down. So I think at least we'll put a stop to that. So that's actually a bullish sign for Safaricom. KCB up 1.162 to close at 43.50, up sharply, nearly 10% since the announcement of the holding company. EABL up 2.22%. Home Africa, which had closed limit down, and this is given, you've got to take into account the issue of profits warning, and this is one of the first opportunities, or the second, for the market to react to it. KenGen unchanged at 6.95, but that's such a cheap share, P of less than 2. We got Albert coming on to Mindspeak this month, can talk to him about all of that. Once again, thank you for stopping by.